All right, Dr. Greer, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Been learning a lot about your work and stuff going on lately.
Great.
Well, I thought we would get into the most recent news coming out of Washington, and there was some congressional testimonies from some retired military pilots.
Yes. Yep. Well, that's the tip of a very big iceberg that's going to be coming out. So, if people really want to know what's going on with this, we just released a documentary called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. Covers 100 years of this sort of technology and information being suppressed. And it's the information people need to know. I mean, we have now 750 whistleblowers. And so they've just started to move some of them through the system, and we're pushing to have open congressional hearings soon, hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months.
What is the 6-month amnesty period that you guys are looking for? You've talked about.
Yeah, well, what that is, I found in my archive from 1993 or 4 when I recommended to President Clinton, after I briefed his CI director on this, that these projects were being run illegally in big corporations that were keeping the UFO issue secret, the technology secret, and that the best way to do it would have a amnesty period where they're notified you have to bring forward your technologies, the spacecraft you've retrieved, which are extraterrestrial in origin, the man-made spacecraft that are running off of reverse engineered technologies, and they got to do it or be criminally prosecuted. So that an amendment to the intelligence funding bill came out of the Congress after our National Press Club event in June. And it got also out of the Senate, I think, pretty unanimously. Right now, it's being held up until the House comes back after recess. And the House of Representatives, if they approve it, then it'll become part of the law. And that will start a clock ticking where these large corporations are going to have to cooperate with the inquiry and turn over what they have or be subject to criminal prosecution. So that is something that is on the table right now, moving through Congress.
Okay, what do you mean by large corporations? Like who?
Well, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, EG&G, SAIC. We have all those corporations, operations pretty well mapped out, know where they're happening. We have people who've been on the inside, who've worked on these technologies. Other companies that are involved, General Electric. We also know that both GM and Ford have had components of their projects that are classified dealing with this issue. Now, what the public needs to understand is that if you're the president or chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee or members of Congress, you're not told about any of this. I mean, of course, this is completely illegal. So the programs that are run dealing with this UFO issue have been unconstitutional since the late 1950s. And that's what we're trying to rectify and fix.
How do they keep it secret from Congress, and how are they able to do that?
Oh, it's easy. I mean, first of all, the government's huge, complicated. The people who are in political office are pulled in 1,000 different directions. And the funding mechanism is very interesting. We had a woman who worked for SAIC who worked in an office where they would have all this money coming in. They would sort of gin up reports, just fake reports that go back to Congress and to auditors, and the money went through the back door into these unsanctioned illegal projects. So the public has been getting ripped off for probably over 60 years. With these sort of programs, 65 years. And, it's a mistake to think that even the people I work with in Washington, I'm here in Washington right now, who manage what's called the black budget of the United States, which is the very secret part of the budget dealing with covert operations. And I've been meeting with those people, and they're not briefed on these issues, but now they know that it's real and there's something going on. So I think the public needs to put aside their fantasy high school civics lesson about how government runs and realize that Eisenhower wasn't too far off the mark when he said, beware the military-industrial complex. And when Senator Inouye, who was the chairman of Intelligence and Foreign Relations, said that there's a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism for funding that's above the law and free from the law itself. I'm quoting. So I think that, this is a huge problem, and the consequences for every person on the planet are huge, because you think of the fact that the technologies that we document in this documentary, The Lost Century, those technologies have been around for over 100 years. I'm talking way beyond what you're looking at with Tesla-type cars. But the real Tesla, Nikola Tesla, he had these sort of technologies, and they were suppressed back in the 20s. So, we need to move forward, because if this issue gets resolved properly, it's not just that we're not alone in the universe, it's that the technologies that get us off oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, wind, solar, these battery cars with 900 pounds of lithium-ion batteries that are so damaging to the environment to make, all that'll be a thing of the past. So now that's part of the problem, because you're talking about a multi-hundred trillion dollar macroeconomic issue, right? Money and power. So the reason the secrecy exists is that kind of corruption, but on a very large scale. I think there are now key members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services, as well as members of the House that I'm meeting with, who understand this and are really wanting to move quickly to get to the bottom of it.
Can you kind of explain to people why this would be kept a secret?
Yeah, I mean, there are two big issues. One is what I just mentioned, power and money. That if it were to be disclosed, that you look at the Pentagon footage of these Navy jet pilots took of chasing one of these objects off the coast of California, that thing was had no jets, no rockets, no nuclear power plant on it, no heat signature. I mean, the infrared, meaning detecting heat, was zero. So how is it moving against 100 and some mile per hour headwind at that altitude? And how is it making right-hand turns and going straight up and down? Well, that's an electromagnetic propulsion system that deals with a very high end of physics. The energy that drives those machines are called the 0-point energy field, which is energy from the space around us. Tesla called it the infinite energy field. So the question really becomes, how long are you going to let these sort of people keep these technologies away from the public when the pollution and the biosphere is being degraded and half the population of the earth is in poverty? And the disclosure of these technologies and this information would completely change that. But imagine you're a multi-trillion-dollar oil company, or have interest in the petrodollar system, et cetera, and so on. Or you're running a public utility. You're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets that run the planet, but it's running the planet into the ground. So there needs to be sort of a new industrial revolution where all those old smokestack industries get replaced with these very high-tech new physics technologies, which already exist. I mean, they don't have to be developed. They've been developed for decades. So when the public learns what's behind the secrecy, that's when they're really going to push to get this disclosed properly and get to the bottom of it.
Do you think other countries have the same technology that we have? And if so, why don't they put it out?
No, they don't. Look, the organization that keeps this secret is global, and they have operations in countries all over the world. It doesn't really respect international boundaries. The very first thing I said to the main investigator for the Senate Intelligence Committee here was, look at the map on the conference room here that we're in. Take all the lines off of it that are between countries or states. This organization moves with alacrity across any national boundary. And they have assets all over the place, but they don't respond to democratically elected offices here, UK, Australia, all over. And anyone anywhere in the world that were to independently develop one of these technologies, those will be confiscated. And if you look at this documentary we just released, The Lost Century, and how to reclaim it, you'll see documented where there are a number of people who have been killed because they had a technology that would be, quote, free energy. It'd be something to sit on the table here, and it would run your house with no electric bill and no pollution. And the energy is coming from the fabric of space around us. It's called the zero-point energy field, which, by the way, was first postulated in 1930s and proven in early 50s. So, this is in the main physics journals, by the way. The so-called levitation anti-gravity technologies began to be experimented with by T. Townsend Brown in the 1920s. And we have the physics journal reports of him creating lift or levitation using very high voltage systems. So once those technologies began to be combined with our studying of extraterrestrial vehicles that we had shot down, then it really took off in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So when I say that we're literally 100 years behind where we should be technologically and socially, it's really true.
Along your journey, when did you start looking for whistleblowers, and how early on were you with this? And
right,
what was like some of the first things that some of these guys first started telling you?
Well, my uncle worked on the lunar module, the machine that landed on the moon the first time with Neil Armstrong. His company was Northrop Grumman. And so I heard of some of these things when I was young in the 60s. So I also saw one of these objects pretty close up in about 1963. I was about 8 years old. So I always had an interest in this. And even, being a medical doctor and an emergency doctor in trauma, I kept my interest up studying it. But in 1990, I started an organization to really dig into this more deeply. And by 1993, I had been asked to brief the director of the CIA for Bill Clinton. Now, at that meeting, I learned that the president and the CIA director and others had been denied access to these covert programs that I knew were going on at my uncle's old company and elsewhere. So it was then that I realized that there was a criminal element to this, a very illegal type of management of a very important issue. And that when Clinton inquired about it, and he eventually got approached by George H.W. Bush, the former president and former CIA director, and he was told, this is none of your business, bug out, just get lost. And I know this for a fact. I have an affidavit from a man who was with Bill Clinton after he left the presidency, and he's a very well-known Hollywood figure and another music singer who was in the limo with Bill Clinton when he shared what happened. And the problem with that is, if you're going to decapitate the presidency and the Congress on something this important, then basically you're setting yourself up as your own entity, and you're going to operate outside the law. And if you operate outside the law on something this important, you are dangerous. So it's a very dangerous game being played. Now, most of the information on the subject is nonsense. I found out that there were covert programs that were staging alien abductions and mutilations. Everyone thinks those are aliens doing that. I said, no, it's not. The CIA special projects and some other special operations people. How are they doing it? Let me give you a date. October 1954 is when we mastered what's called gravity control, where you can take an object, put an electromagnetic field, boom, and it flies, like these videos you see that the Pentagon has released and confirmed that they're real. So that was 1954. So by the late 50s, early 60s, these were platforms or advanced technology aircraft that don't use jets or rockets, highly classified. And the other reason for the secrecy, I'm going to tell you right now, is to sort of create the specter of a threat from outer space, which doesn't exist, by the way. It's totally a fraud, for the purpose of amassing more military power globally, by staging a threat from outer space. And remember, if you look at our documentary Unacknowledged, which is still up on Amazon, all the platforms, it details how Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, on his deathbed begged a member of my team, Carol Rosen, to expose the fact that they were planning to stage an alien attack and to look like we're under some sort of threat. And it was all a false flag, totally a false operation. And that the purpose behind that would be to amass huge amounts of geopolitical power, sort of in a totalitarian way, through military operations. So this is a little bit like the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, where we staged the attack on our Navy vessels so they could expand the Vietnam War when, of course, the American public was against it. So these sort of what I call false flag operations happen quite a bit. And what we have to be sure is that the public understands all this, but also the members of Congress and White House. So it's a very complicated problem. And if you Google this subject, I'd say 90% of everything that comes up is just nonsense, frankly. But there's a core of it that's true, and there are extraterrestrial vehicles and civilizations. There are advanced aircraft that are anti-gravity based on ET craft that were studied flying around. I'd say probably 80% of the UFOs people see are actually ours. But they're not acknowledged. That's why we named that documentary Unacknowledged, because it's the first word in unacknowledged special access projects. And the unacknowledged SAPs are the ones that are off book, deep black, etc. And they deal with this. And this is a real problem, because in my meetings with senior members of the Senate and House, and also White House and cabinet level people over the years, as well as Pentagon folks, I mean, they are not allowed access to those projects. And if they push too hard, they get threatened. It's like in 1997, I briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Wilson. And I had given him a portfolio of documents and information that I have that are in our book, Unacknowledged, if people want to see them. And he ended up, because one of those documents had the project code names and numbers from the early 90s from Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51. So he made some inquiries, and he got hold of one of the offices. And he said, look, I'm Admiral Wilson, I'm J2. And they said, oh, yes, sir, we know who you are. And he says, well, I want to be read in, which is military speak for briefed on this subject. And they said, sir, you don't have a need to know. And he said, excuse my language, he said, God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They said, sir, we will not discuss this with you any further. Cut the line. And then he pushed further and got threatened personally, and threatened with losing a star and being demoted in his position as an admiral. So this is the sort of thing that I've been firsthand involved with for 30 years. It's just now coming around that the American public is awakening to this in a serious way. And the Congress, to their credit, are really trying to get to the bottom of it.
Okay. You mentioned 80% of UFOs seen are ours.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yes, I would say, well, depending on where you are. Certainly if you're out in the high desert of California, if you're in certain locations where we have these assets that come and go, yeah, there's a very high number of them. Perhaps in other parts of the world it'd be lower than the 80, but we do know that these advanced technologies, or some people call them ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, because they're man-made devices based on studying in part the extraterrestrial devices, spacecraft. Are more common, and they're actually, over the last 60 years, have become more and more refined to where the average person would be completely deceived about whether it was an extraterrestrial or alien craft versus a man-made one, which is in and of itself very dangerous, because, if you look at those pilots who were, before the hearing last month, I spoke to David Fravor, who was one of those two pilots. And, as jet pilots, they were not read in on the fact that Lockheed Skunk Works or Raytheon, other corporations, had these devices that could move that way. And so, their assumption that all of those had to be alien, but they're not. So, it's a very complicated picture, only because your people are forgetting that we now have in our archive 122 cases where we have shot down using electromagnetic weapons these ET craft. And I'm sure that number is much, much higher. Well, what does that mean? If you retrieve that kind of technology and you've got virtually unlimited funds and some of the brightest scientists in the world working on the problem, you're going to have huge breakthroughs from the 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way to now. And then those get turned into devices that could absolutely deceive the public about something happening that looks like an alien attack on a village in Brazil, right? You heard this whistleblower, Mr. Grush, say that that whole operation was a covert human operation, staged to make it look like it's alien. So, one of the things in 1991, I had a guy deep in the intelligence community came to me and he said, Dr. Greer, if you tell the truth about this, it's less believable than the fiction we're selling. And, that really is true, because the actual truth about this is a kind of mind blowing. But, everything I'm telling you is true.
That's a lot of UFOs to be in the sky. How do they keep?
It's not that many. I mean, it's not like every single day, in any given geographical area, there's swarms of these moving around. But I'm just saying that a lot of the ones that have been seen and thought to be of extraterrestrial origin are not. And then there are ones that actually are. And you have to know enough. And one of the things we did, if you get on our website, you'll see we did a 2-day conference before our National Press Club event. And one of those sessions during those, whatever it was, 20 hours of presentations, and you can still see this up there, is that we put on one side what the man-made ones look like, and on the other side what the extraterrestrial ones look like. And they're very rather distinctive. Now, the more advanced the man-made ones get, the easier it is to confuse them with an extraterrestrial one. And for most people, if they see something at a great distance, they see a light or some object moving erratically, they're not going to see enough detail to know whether that was one of ours or something from another star system. And this becomes a huge problem, because if policymakers and people at the Pentagon don't know that, then it would be very easy to trick everyone. And so there are two big, I think, overarching reasons for the secrecy. One is the technology and science game, where they're keeping this secret because they're protecting $1,000 trillion worth of oil and utilities and coal and nuclear power plants. The other is this game of trying to eventually let this come out, but spin it in the direction of this false narrative of there being an alien threat. So those are the two twin pillars of the secrecy since the 1950s.
Is that the only technology that we've gotten from these spacecrafts?
Oh, no. I mean, there's a whole constellation of them. So you have energy systems, propulsion, communication, surveillance technologies that bypass electromagnetic fields, really kind of amazing technologies. There are biological spin-offs. As a doctor, I actually have learned of some of these technologies that would be amazing for curing some very serious injuries and diseases. But again, it's using this type of physics, generally called trans-dimensional physics. It's very high voltage electromagnetic field systems. And so there are many spin-offs. And this is one of the problems. Over the last 75 years, the only thing that's been a spin-off from these technologies are things like integrated circuits, silicon chips, fiber optics, night vision. Those all came about from studying ET material. But the energy, propulsion, things that would really make a difference in how we live. Because imagine, I mean, even if you're just, Joe Sixpack with an F-150 pickup truck, which is my culture from North Carolina. I grew up like that in North Carolina. If it's costing you $125 to fill up that truck, but you could put an electric motor in there and a little tiny battery that would start the electric generator, and it'd never have to be plugged in. There'd be no fuel charge. Well, everyone on Earth, except people who are highly vested in the current paradigm of energy, would think this is great. So out of 8 billion people, there'd be certain people who wouldn't like this. And the average worker in a coal mine or oil field or solar panel factory, they just have to be retrained and given some assistance until they move into these new high-tech sectors. But you really can't keep this secret for too much longer. It's too dangerous geopolitically for the planet. It's too dangerous for the environment and what's happening to the Earth. And it creates huge instability. I mean, the whole have and have-nots problem with the developing world in the West is in large part because of the energy sector. Because imagine if 8 billion people live like you and I do with air conditioning and cars, the price of a gallon of gasoline would be $100 a gallon, at least. So the system we have now requires unbelievable poverty. And the only way to get out of that trap is to bring out these new scientific breakthroughs. But to do that is easier said than done. You talk about, when you talk about Washington, you talk about, special interests and vested interests and lobbyists. Some of the biggest, most powerful military contractors and energy sector lobbyists are going to be not happy with this coming out, because when you move away from, what I always tell people, look at that video. You can splice it into this show if you want, of the Pentagon, the film footage from David Fravor and other pilots. Look at how that thing's moving. I just tell people that is an alternative energy and propulsion system. That's absolutely what it is. It's an alternative energy and propulsion system. Everyone, you need to demystify it a bit, because once you understand that you're dealing with a whole new area of energy and propulsion, then it makes sense why this is secret. It makes total sense why it's secret. In fact, not that it's good. And I think maybe in the 40s and 50s when those decisions were made, they weren't aware of climate change. They weren't aware of oceans dying. They weren't aware of all these other issues. And what happened is that it became a deep, black, covert institutional issue that the generations since the 40s and 50s haven't known what to do with. And the result is the world we see. And the world we see is we're headed towards sort of an extinction level event, environmentally and otherwise. And I tell people the good news, however, the reason to be very hopeful is that we can prove we have the technologies to fix it. So that's why this summer we released this documentary, The Lost Century, and how to reclaim it. The important last part, how to reclaim it. How do you go from this mess we're in now to a new civilization that would have free energy? Eventually, we'd be able to get rid of roads because you'd be floating above with anti-gravity devices. You'd be able to restore the land, the oceans, and clean them. Water, you can pull water out of the air because the energy to dehumidify air and create water would be free energy. You could desalinate ocean water. There'd be no more problem with shortages of water in all the developing world. Et cetera, and so on and so forth. And every little village in Africa, Asia, anywhere could have one of these generators providing their energy needs for being able to become developed, but without damaging the environment. The other thing is, I don't know, a lot of people know this, 3 billion people right now on Earth don't have the means to cook their food. They're cutting down rainforests and cutting up brushes and deserts and stuff. That's 3 billion. And so a lot of the damage to all the foliage is because humans just don't have any way to even cook their food. So when you have 3 out of the 8 billion people living like that, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have technologies that have been illegally classified and kept secret that would fix that problem, this becomes an issue that's much more about little green men or something. It's really more about the human future, in my opinion.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that there was around, I think you said 120 aircraft shot down?
122 cases that we know of extraterrestrial vehicles that have not been shot down with kinetic missiles, but with electromagnetic weapons.
Okay. If we're shooting down their aircraft, why would they keep coming back? And, did we ever recover any aliens from this stuff?
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you look at the Disclosure Project material, including on my YouTube channel, the interviews with some of the men that were on these retrieval teams, you'll see, for example, Sergeant Clifford Stone, who was on in the 60s. He's just recently passed away. Was on a team retrieving the bodies and handling them from these downings. Yes, we have multiple people who've been involved in those operations. I have a new whistleblower coming forward who was doing that in northern Nevada. out of a helicopter base where they had downed an ET vehicle, although it did not get destroyed and it ended up taking off again, but not before this military top secret guy had an encounter with two of the ETs who were incredibly nice people, apparently, and were kind of appalled that we were still doing this. So, and I have been at places where I know that these objects have been downed, and I have a list of about 147 facilities where the objects have been stored or where they've been taken to, where the bodies are stored. And all of this is I'm in the process of handing over to the Senate and House investigators and the Pentagon.
What are these bodies like? Like, you know, we get the classic image of like what an alien looks like. Do they look like that? Like, what are they like? You know what I mean? Like, what would like their insides work like? Is that stuff you could talk about? Or no?
I know some of it. So the sort of stereotype of the bug-eyed alien, that's sort of a stereotype. It's sort of a racist caricature, actually, to be honest with you. And what you really are dealing with here, I know by the time Sergeant Stone was finished with his involvement, and this was in the late 60s, right? They had cataloged 69 different species, different life forms. And so there's one species that at full adulthood is about 1.5 feet. There's another species that's 10 or 12 feet. The ones that people often refer to are around 3 to 4 feet, 39 inches or so tall. And in our archive, we have very good forensic drawings from men who've been on the retrieval teams of what these various species look like. So they run the gamut. It's not just one. And the reason they keep coming back, two things. Number one, it's not a coincidence that the modern era of all this started when we started detonating atomic bombs, right? Now, why? What Edward Teller and Oppenheimer didn't understand when they were developing that is that when you detonate an atomic bomb, you get, everybody knows about an electromagnetic pulse, the pulse that goes out, knocks out all electronic communication. What people didn't know about is something that Tesla had written about decades earlier, and that there's also a pulse of what's called scalar energy. And scalar is faster than the speed of light. A light wave is like this, right? A wave of light. Coherent light, a laser, is just synced up, green or red or what have you. A scalar wave is a point that goes out in a straight line and doesn't have the wave function. So it's very fast. And that scalar wave that came out of the atomic explosions disrupt interstellar communications and travel. So they were very concerned that we were about ready to blow up the planet and kill all ourselves, which of course that's what mutual assured destruction, which is the defense posture between Russia and America is. And one nuke goes off, they all go off, and the Earth's biosphere is destroyed. The other is that it's destructive to them. And then the third issue is that here we are still fighting like a bunch of monkeys, but instead of using muskets and bombs and airplanes, we have thermonuclear weapons, and in these covert programs, even more advanced weapons that are electromagnetic weapons, and we're going out into space. So this puts a big red flag over a civilization like ours. So I think these civilizations are not hostile to humans per se, or to the Earth, but they are very worried about our hostility. You see, our culture is so narcissistic. I say, you stop for one damn minute and look at this planet through the eyes of another civilization. What do we look like? What do we look like? Endless wars. We're cannibalizing our own biosphere. Half the world's population doesn't have indoor plumbing. We're not taking care of each other. And all of this is fixable, but through corruption, the solutions aren't there. And at the same time, we're developing these weapon systems from studying extraterrestrial craft we've gotten and downed and shot down. And now we're using those weapons increasingly against the ETs. So there's one black site that I know of that I'm going to be visiting that knocks 2 or 3 of these ET craft down per year still. So this kind of behavior, to say that this is a huge, national security problem, And it isn't because the ETs are hostile. It's because these nut jobs who are running these covert programs, in my opinion, are just sort of like, have you ever seen that movie, Dr. Strangelove, where the crazy scientist is writing the missile down, screaming, Yahoo, they're kind of like, they're kind of like that. Isn't that crazy stuff going on? And they're brilliant, some of them, but they're so diabolical. So this thing is going on without, and of course the Congress is trying to catch up with understanding this. The White House, same situation. But the only way, here's how I think it's going to happen. This is why I'm very encouraged in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've been recommending that the Congress have an open hearing through a select committee that would have subpoena power. So the people that we need to, out of our whistleblower pool, many of them that are in current top secret positions, need to be brought in under subpoena. But a normal congressional committee can't do that. It has to be approved by the Speaker of the House, et cetera. So now they've written a letter. 6 of the members of Congress have recently, in the last couple of weeks, written a letter calling for that. Now, if that happens, then my entire intelligence archive, with all the names of these 750 witnesses and whistleblowers, can be looked at and triaged, and the best ones and most important ones be brought up. And then the whole American public will see what this is. The other thing that needs to happen if they pass this amnesty bill, when the 6-month period where they could, with impunity, come forward with all this material and craft and bodies. But at the end of that, it's criminal. And what are you going to do? You got to have law enforcement because, you're not going to be, it's like going to the mafia in New York and knocking on the front door of a pizza parlor. In the back room, they're laundering money and running drugs, right? You're not going to go in there and knock on the front door. And I've said this to members of Congress and say, hey, pretty please, show me what's going on back here in the back room. You got to go in with law enforcement, and you're going to have to insist on getting access to these underground bases where these items are stored. You're going to have to insist on getting control over the manufacturing facilities for these man-made craft. The free zero-point energy systems, those need to be liberated and looked at, and the ones that can be used safely, not as a weapon system, but just to generate energy for you and me and our children and grandchildren, those need to be brought forward in a big new industrial revolution. All that needs to happen. And it isn't going to happen because members of Congress, like they did, in this hearing that you referred to, they talked about going down to Eglin Air Force Base, making an appointment and knocking on the front door. And they said they didn't see anything. Well, of course not. I mean, if it's a criminal organization, they're not going to cooperate that way. And this is the big thing the American people are understanding. The folks running these programs are absolutely doing so unsanctioned, against the Constitution, and breaking multiple laws every single day. So if that's their worldview, where they consider themselves the masters of the universe to do anything they damn well please, these are not people who are going to respond to a new law unless there's some kind of backing it up with teeth. So at some point, we're going to have to back it up with real enforcement.
Being that we've shot down so many of their aircrafts, has anybody ever met one and
Oh, sure.
talked with them, had meetings with them or anything like that?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely, it's happened. And I mean, I've worked with a number of people who have. Now, those are the guys that need to be under subpoena to come forward. And let me say something here. It should be obvious to anyone if you read between the lines, but let me connect the dots so it's obvious. A lot of people have been killed for exposing much less than this, right? So we also need the Congress to put in place a witness protection program for these guys, and also protection of their pensions and their assets. So, the ones who have had the most detailed involvement, the guys who just encounter accidentally something like those pilots did that were at the hearing, Mr. Grush, based on information we'd been getting to his bosses and others, was able to talk to the people who were involved, but he didn't get on the inside. So I want to make a distinction. The whistleblowers we have at the Disclosure Project are the people who actually handled the craft, actually worked at Lockheed, Skunk Works, actually were in commands and in facilities, had been in the underground bases and seen the ET craft there that we were trying to take apart and study, et cetera, and so on. Those are the people that need to be brought in. Because in my archive, we have several thousand pilot encounters like what you saw at that hearing. There's nothing new. In fact, the best ones were not even presented there. The best ones are the ones in our archive. But one of the problems is, to be honest with you, it is too much information. So we have like 8 terabytes of data. So what we have to do, we're trying to scan that into an archive database so it's searchable, and then curate the absolute best of all that to put in front of members of Congress and the media, because no one's going to go through 8 terabytes of data, right? I mean, it takes you years. So that's one of the things we're working on right now.
Okay. I mean, do you ever think there'll be a point to where like aliens just pull up on Earth and they're just like, yo, we're here?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that has happened, but it's gotten covered up. There have been a number of pretty spectacular events like that over the years have been covered up. Now, what you're suggesting is something we're planning for. So if you have Amazon or Tubi or any of these sites, you can see another documentary, a third one that I'd recommend you looking at, called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So the original project I started was Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and we have an app, which is in the top 10 in the world for educational apps, called CE5 Contact. And CE5 Contact is sort of a training program for people to go out and make the kind of contact you're asking about. So the question you asked, has that happened? Yes, absolutely. Do we have proof of it? Yes. And look at the film, you'll see it. Now, those are unofficial. In other words, that's not being done by the State Department or UN or something. That is sort of a civilian group doing this, but it's pretty astonishing when you look at that documentary. It'll blow your mind. But what we eventually would like to see happen is this issue gets resolved and the official governments of the world reach out to these civilizations for the kind of meeting you're talking about. I think that could be set up, but we're not quite ready for that yet. And one thing that I know it's a little bit sounds like Star Trek, but there sort of is a prime directive that they don't just land on the White House lawn and force the whole world to know about them, because 2 reasons. First of all, the way a civilization like ours would react to that would be this sort of like alien invasion week on the History Channel or some nonsense. The other is that they need to be sure that the planet is prepared and that we quit lying to each other and educate each other about this in a way that isn't hysterical. Because most of the stuff out there on that subject is fear-mongering hysteria, as I mentioned, and it's been done deliberately for psychological warfare tactics. I have 2 CIA documents I can reference on that, by the way. 1953, CIA Director Smith said the UFO issue should be used for its psychological warfare value, meaning use it in a way that can convince people and manipulate people in a certain direction. That's what psychological warfare, psyops, are. And then there's a 1985 document that we have proof exists, but we don't possess it yet. That is a CIA document where they were sending abduction squads down to Brazil and Argentina. And this isn't an official CIA document, using these advanced technologies and these fake alien-looking creatures. Most of the ones you talked about, like the bug-eyed, those are man-made kind of like robotic things. They're not ETs. And those were used to abduct and torture peasants, as it says. This is a 1985 document in Argentina and Brazil. And this is an official document. And then we have an Air Force intelligence guy on our team who we have his deposition on videotape where he says, absolutely, we've been staging these abductions. Now, if you were to go on the street and ask 1,000 people, have you heard of alien abductions? Oh, yeah. And they all think it's, of course, ET's doing it. I'm going, nope, that's a covert psyop. So I think that's one of the big issues here is that the world has to get educated on the whole spectrum of this secrecy and cover-up, so that before the ETs are going to land, out in the desert and say, hi, y'all, right? And unfortunately, we're not starting at base camp trying to go up Mount Everest. We're starting down 20,000 leagues under the ocean because there's been so much false information that's made its way through Hollywood, pop culture, even the music industry, that has to be corrected. And, a lot of that, like I said, that whole operation was launched in 1953, even before I was born, man. So, a long time ago. And we have to really provide education to correct that. And we have to expose the lie. We have to expose the truth, but you have to expose the big lie. Since most of the information out there on this subject is some form of curated counterintelligence, disinformation, false information. So unfortunately, it's not as simple as people think. It's a rather complex mess.
Okay, now you've talked about how our technology has been getting better with these vehicles that we've captured and shot down. Now, how fast can these vehicles go? And are we advanced enough to where we can fly these things through space and go visit other places?
Well, yes. If you look at our materials, there's an object that was seen at the Norton Air Force Base in California back in 1988. That base is closed now. And it was a classified air show. And there was a man who was in there, Brad Sorensen, that we have his testimony where he saw 3 of these man-made ones. Now, they were early models from the late 50s, early 60s, because inside they had Mercury era spacecraft from the Mercury era in the late 50s, early 60s components. But those had been around not out of interstellar, not to other star systems, but those had been all around our solar system. And those were operational late 50s up through the 60s. We have the full testimony of that. We have forensic drawings of the craft. We have schematics of the interior of the craft. It's all on our website. It's all in our books. It's all in the unacknowledged documentary. So what we've been trying to do is, and thank you for hosting me, is to get this word out so people can avail themselves of this really compelling and interesting information that we already have collected. But every single week, there's not a week or day that goes by that I don't have a new top secret whistleblower approaching us now. So there's an avalanche of this coming. We just need a vehicle to get it out to the public.
Why are so many people willing to talk about this classified stuff that's been happening? They had to have, signed some serious paperwork, and, they had to have been threatened with jail and, bankrupt if they come out, being sued and,
Killed.
All this other stuff. Why are people so comfortable coming out?
They're not comfortable, but they approach me and I try to encourage them, and I don't disclose who they are unless they want to be named publicly. Now, on our YouTube channel, I think we have 70 of these top secret people, name, rank, serial number, everything. So I tell people, get on there and look at it. You don't believe, don't take my word for this. I'm a retired emergency doctor. Look at these 70 men and women who worked in the programs. We have their testimony. Full stop. And the case frickin' closed. Now, we have another 700 that have given me information, intelligence, documents, locations of facilities that have not wanted to come out publicly, but many of them are willing to be subpoenaed in a formal process where it's, where they're able to speak publicly without their non-disclosure agreements being violated, where they could be arrested or what have you. Now, one good thing that happened last December in 2022, the Congress passed and the president signed the National Defense Authorization Act that had a provision for these people with these clearances to come and give their information to an office at the Pentagon called the AARO office, AARO. And I have been bringing people through the system, mainly through some contacts I have in the Senate, who then are handed off and go to this top secret facility. The problem with that is that top secret process, you have some foxes guarding that hen house. I would prefer that those people be testifying in open court or in open congressional hearings. So that's what we want to move to next. But as it is now, there is a mechanism for people to speak about this and share it with the legal, let's call it legal U.S. government, as opposed to the illegal government, and not be penalized at all for their national security oaths and their non-disclosure agreement. So we've set that up. That's in place. Now, a little fine point here. I don't even think that's necessary, because in 1997, I wrote a letter to every agency in the U.S. government that required a response, or it was considered to be something we could act on. And it said, our assessment, having briefed the president and members of Senate intelligence and members of senior generals and admirals at the Pentagon, all of who had been denied access or threatened when they inquired about this, is that these projects are illegal. And because they're illegal, they can't enforce these non-disclosure agreements. It's sort of like if you have a contract with someone in the mafia and that is an illegal operation, you're not bound by that contract because the underlying operation was criminal. So what I am saying to all of these whistleblowers is that you're not bound by anything you sign. None of the paperwork you signed is enforceable, because the entire program, even though they didn't know it, people, if you're at a mid or low level, you're not going to know at the very top what's going on because it's compartmented. It's like a lead ceiling around you. But those folks, I've told them, you're free and clear. And that's why a lot of them have come forward publicly. And I've been given top secret documents that aren't declassified, which is a felony to expose to anyone. It's like $10,000 fine each time you show it to someone and 10 years in prison. I published them where millions of people have seen them. Go get my books, Unacknowledged and Disclosure, those 2 books. So now, how have I gotten away with that? Because we have declared these projects illegal. And if someone were to try to stop us from putting that information out, we would go straight to court. And we would be able to prove that this entire operation is a criminal operation. They don't want that fight. So that's how we've done what we've done. Now, is it scary? And have I been threatened? Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be? But this is a pearl of great price. This is not the one you throw back into the ocean. When you realize what's being kept from humanity, and I have 4 daughters and 12 grandchildren. The idea that we're going to just keep going forward, cannibalizing and destroying the planet when we already have the solution to all these huge problems, poverty and all that. And that's why people really need to look at the Lost Century and how to reclaim, because it outlines in detail all these technologies and also all the nasty things that have been done to keep them secret, confiscated. Like, for example, we show an actual national security order on a patent that an inventor or scientist that's I know was given because he had something that would run your house from the magnetic flux, the electromagnetic field around you, with no energy costs and no pollution. But the patent office seized it and said, no, we will not grant this because this is a matter of national security. Well, it wasn't a matter of national security. It was corrupt influences inside the patent office denying the patent. Now, this happens all the time. The Federation of American Scientists, very mainstream scientific organization, in 2010, 13 years ago, published a finding that over 5,000 patents like that had been seized under national security provisions. And they even cited one from like 1970, 50 years ago, that was a very high efficient solar type panel, more efficient than anything we have now on the market, and it was seized. And we're not talking about anti-gravity and traveling through space. We're just talking about a more efficient solar panel. It was seized under a national security order. And this scientific mainstream group cites this. So you'll see all that in this documentary. It's going to blow people's minds when they realize, wow, we are living in a faint shadow of a world, and what a shame. But on the same token, if we all come together to fix the problem, we'll be able to create a whole new civilization within 15, 20 years, well within even my lifetime and certainly yours.
Now, you mentioned being threatened. What do you think was like the worst time you were threatened, or, what was like the biggest offer you've received to keep your mouth shut?
Well, the head of Army Intelligence, General Stubblebine, offered me personally $2 billion in 1992 if I would be quiet. And I, of course, turned it down. I'm not rich, but as a doctor, I didn't need the money. I didn't want the money. And it was a bribery. And then there were things that were very threatening. We had break-ins in our house. We had our computers erased, all the hard drives and software. We had direct threats. But, I'm not worried about that at this point. We have good security in place. There are people in these covert programs now that are protecting us. So I'm not worried about that.
Is there any time somebody just really had you scared?
If I were the kind of person who could be scared by that, yes, but I'm just not. I mean, one of the things is that when I was 17, I died. I was very sick and I had a near-death experience. And I was talking to Demi Lovato about this because she had a near-death experience. And it kind of taught me that the conscious field and our consciousness goes on forever. So I just don't have that same kind of view about mortality that I think a lot of people would. So that's part of it. And part of it is, look, I'm a trauma guy. I've been in the ER with people come in with Tech 9s and stick them in my face and, all kinds of, gang fights in the ER and stuff. So, I'm not someone who's going to be like, putting my tail between my leg running because someone threatens me. If they threaten me, I'm going to say, excuse my language, fuck you. And, but that's just me. I'm just not someone that will succumb to intimidation. Unfortunately, though, there are a lot of dirty tricks played. Like there's a top secret witness that we're dealing with right now. And when he started coming forward, he had a couple of guys show up in a black SUV, went to his front door. They said, look at your phone. And they had embedded child pornography on his computers and phones and said, you keep your mouth shut or you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life and you're never going to see your two young sons again. Now, that just happened last year, or was it earlier this year? Whatever. But this is the kind of nasty stuff. Now, my view on that is there should be an office in the Department of Justice and FBI that takes a report like that, finds out who did it, and they throw those people in shackles and put them in prison. Why should these heroic men and women that are risking their lives to come forward be intimidated by these thugs? It should be the other way around. But see, the U.S. government has not yet stood up that kind of law enforcement around this because they're just now beginning to awaken to the fact this is an issue. So in the meanwhile, I just tell people just ignore that stuff and let me know about it and we'll expose it for the dirty tricks that it is. But, look, when you're dealing with this level of corruption, to give you an idea how bad it is, there's the chairman of a major corporation. If I said the name of it, everyone listening would know what it is. And he's reached out. He's retired. And when he started reaching out, he was told, we will kill you and your entire family. So because he was holding really important stuff, documents, proof, energy, free energy. And I said, yeah, well, here's the problem with that. I think they won't do it, but they're going to try to intimidate you that they will. But the other part of the problem is that because of his position, he has a few $100 million in assets that were probably a lot of them due to some of these illegally run projects that were inside this corporation. And he doesn't want to lose that either. But his big concern is safety. So this is why I'm asking members of Congress. I just recently, I think about 10 days ago, had a meeting with Congresswoman Luna, who's on the House Oversight Committee, and said, look, we need witness protection for some of these high-value whistleblowers, and we also need protection from their assets so that they can come forward and not be penalized for wanting to tell the truth to Congress, but also to the American people. So again, those are things that are pending. I don't know if we're going to get those this year. I do think we'll get the amnesty period, and we've already gotten the pathway for people with their clearances and their non-disclosure agreements to testify at this Pentagon office. But it really needs to be kicked up to a much higher level now, now that the Congress has seen enough of the smoke and fire that they know it's real. That's why you're seeing these hearings.
Have you ever had any of your whistleblowers killed?
Back before I had the security that we have now in place. So prior to 1998, yeah, there were 3 of us that got killed. I was almost killed. I had an assistant killed, and there was a former CI director who was helping us who was killed. His name is Bill Colby. And CI Director Colby was going to hand off one of these 0-point energy, free energy devices and around $50 million in seed money so we could get it out, because he was old and retired, and he knew what a disaster and regretted this being kept secret, just like the chairman of this major corporation he very much regrets what they've done. And that's why we need to protect those people and have them come forward. But at that time, we didn't have what we have in place now. And they made it look like he was found in the water south of D.C. and made it look like a canoeing accident, the CI Director Colby. But his best friend, who was a full bird colonel, came to me and said, they got him. It's a wet works. Wet works is a CIA term for wet from blood assassinations, targeted killings. But that has not happened since 98. And I don't see any evidence we need to worry about that. But they will try to intimidate witnesses. But witness intimidation and setting up false entrapment, those are felonies. And so when anybody who reaches out to me says this has started happening, why I should be able to have a hotline straight to the FBI that deploys a field office that protects these people. But see, that's not in place yet. And that's what I'm pushing hard, because I think these men and women they're really heroic. I mean, they're very brave and they're scared. And so we owe them the most we can do to protect them. And I have good people who protect me now. And that protection extends to these whistleblowers, but they're afraid for unsanctioned actions, or like this one man, he had to sign a 80-year non-disclosure agreement. He was in his 50s or late 40s. And he was 10 years in a very top secret project dealing directly with this issue and the extraterrestrial craft, all of it. But in that document he signed, it said that if you disclose this, you will have no pensions, you can be imprisoned. And so he's afraid. So we need to put some things in place where these sort of men and women can be properly protected, where the law is explicitly protecting them, and where if it's federal marshal or whatever witness protection services are stood up around them.
Now, I know you've mentioned, you have a lot of security, and you probably move pretty safe nowadays, and to take care of yourself and the whistleblowers who, they'll become public. But if somebody like that wanted you dead, it seems like they would figure it out how to do it,
Oh, sure.
What do you think is stopping them from doing it?
2 things. I have people who have made it quite clear, if anyone on my team or I get directly threatened or hurt, the people running those covert programs, all of them will be killed. I won't have to say anything. So it's sort of what's the old term, a Mexican standoff. And those guys know that, and they know it's serious. And then there's some other things that are in place. I have what's called a dead man trigger, which means something happens to me. There's information I'm holding strategically, deliberately back that will hit the internet. And it'd be the end of this group on multiple levels. So I'm actually better off alive than dead for them, because being alive, they can just marginalize me, defame me, call me names, blacklist me from media. By the way, the mainstream media, the only people they'll allow on all those shows are the people telling all the lies. Because here's another part of this little mystery. Everyone thinks we have a free press. Nonsense. I mean, a show like yours is free. But if you start getting into the big legacy media, CNN, Fox, New York Times, Washington Post, Time Magazine, I have had people on the boards of these who told me, oh yeah, we have CIA people in there. If something comes up or someone comes up, we will be told, don't cover it. So what we call the fourth estate, and one of the things in our Constitution is the freedom of the press. Well, the freedom of what press? The big press, the corporate press and media is very much corrupt. In fact, I would say that if there was actually a mainstream big media outlet that would take a few weeks to go through our intelligence archive and all the material we have, and they put that out to the public, A, they would get every Pulitzer Prize there is, and B, they would have the biggest story in history. And I've offered that. And there have been people with major, like ABC News, their executive producers for their news magazines approached me. I gave him 35 digital hours of content. And he got back to me, he says, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this story. And I said, I'm not surprised. So see, I've been dealing with that since the 90s. And one of the myths of the American dream is that we still have a truly free press. The other myth is that we have a free market economy. I always say, how do you figure we have a free market economy if the most important technologies and scientific discoveries of the last 100 years have been kept off the market ruthlessly, right? And not all of it's a wet works or assassination. A lot of it is some inventor invents some really cool energy generation device, and they're offered, here's $20 million by a corporate entity. The corporation buys it, puts it on a shelf, they've gotten rights to it, and it's never released. So that happens all the time with these technologies. So if you look at this film, The Lost Century, and how to reclaim it, you'll see all the different strategies that have been used over the last 100 years to kind of hoover up, like a vacuum cleaner, all these science and technologies. But given that level of corruption, how can anyone claim that we have a truly free market economy if we're all slaves to oil and to our public utility company and filling up our gas tank or charging our electric batteries off the grid? And let's not forget, I mean, if you have a Tesla or any of these electric cars, and I have 2 electric, but they're being charged off a coal-fired and gas-fired electric grid. 85% of that electricity is from very polluting sources. And those lithium-ion batteries are an environmental holocaust if you look at how they're mining them, what it's doing to the earth. So these, I call them pseudo-environmental solutions. Whereas the real environmental solutions, no one's talking about. And if they try to talk about it, they get silenced, they get censored. So this is one of the major problems we're trying to fix, is that we have to bring these technologies out, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years, if we're going to actually transition to a really clean post-smokestack economy. It ain't going to have, windmills and solar. It's not enough energy density to run 8 billion people. If you're rich, yeah, you can put a solar farm on your land, and good for you that you can spend $100,000 doing that. If you can afford a $100,000 Tesla, good for you, but it's being charged off a coal-fired power grid. Not many people are going to put giant windmills on their property. And here's, the other thing is that if you were to take all the battery storage capacity we have for when the wind isn't blowing to store the electricity or the sun isn't shining, it would run the energy needs of the planet for 75 seconds, 1 minute and 15 seconds. That's all we have storage capacity. So it simply isn't going to be a solution long term. Yeah, it helps some right now, but it's really like spitting into the face of a Category 5 hurricane. And there's this huge hurricane of environmental and scarcity and poverty in the world. And, expensive solar and wind solutions aren't going to be it. But these other technologies that are highly classified and have been illegally confiscated, yes, that would fix that problem. It would fix poverty and the environment in one fell swoop. But because it has I think the term is disruptive technology. People think, the iPhone was disruptive or the internet. No, I'm talking, this is like your basic foundation of our entire industrial civilization is run off of a paradigm from the 1800s of oil, gas, coal, nuclear. So how are we going to fix that? We got to just make this leap forward. And it's difficult because there are so many powerful interests don't want to see that happen.
Are you familiar with Bob Lazon?
You mean Bob Lazar?
Lazar. My bad. I had to Spelling error right there. Bob Lazar, yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I met him and I know of him. Now, he was one person who said he was at Area 51 and saw one of these ET craft. I haven't gotten anyone who can corroborate that. So one of the things that I look for is corroboration, other people who were there, documents, et cetera, and so on. So out of the hundreds of whistleblowers we have, some of them may not have known each other, but they saw the same thing or they observed this. You see what I'm saying? So that's what we look for. So I don't really know, whether what he has shared is everything or accurate or not. And so I really can't comment on that beyond that. But, I think part of the problem is he was a very young guy. And the physics that I think they explained to him about how these objects work may not have been quite the truth. They may have deliberately deceived him on that. But that's something that's another discussion. But certainly the assets, let's call them the ET craft and the man-made ones, are there at that base and also at Edwards Air Force Base. There's Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. It's a huge underground facility that have these assets. We know where a lot of these craft are stored and kept, and also where the man-made ones are being created. Let's do a reset. There's the government of the United States. That's the legal government. There's a secret government that's illegal. Just exactly what Senator Inouye said. When he said there's a secret government with its own Air Force, its own funding mechanism. So the illegal secret government used these in clandestine operations, drug running, human trafficking, staging false events like abductions so people think the aliens are a threat, and in some cases just normal operational use and testing and development. But they're not used in, if you were to contact the senior folks at the Pentagon, one of the comments that Admiral Wilson said, and also the man I briefed who is the head of the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, he's a 3-star General Hughes. He said, look, we can't get any information on this, but the problem is the best thing I have is a B-2 stealth bomber. And this secret government group have things that can do circles around it. So they said, what are we going to do? I said, well, you have to get these under control. Now, this is what I've been saying to everyone from the CIA director for Bill Clinton in 93 all the way through the 90s, and I'm still saying it to members of Congress. The good news is that the amnesty bill, if it passes, which after a 6-month period, all those operations would be considered criminal, then you could put law enforcement in place that goes in and seizes these craft and technologies and the bodies. And I understand there could be some living ETs in captivity.
So you think we've captured some ETs, or it's possible?
Yep.
And we're
absolutely
like holding
have.
them?
Yep, we have.
Okay.
Very, very unfortunate.
Being that these ETs are, light years ahead of us, technology-wise, how come they just don't? Why wouldn't they just come here and just either take us over or come get their people back?
Mm-hmm. Well, because they're wise enough to know that if they were to do such a thing, it would create panic and would also be portrayed by the spinmeisters as an alien invasion. See, it's a catch-22. If they were to do what you're suggesting, the public has already been brainwashed about there being a threat from aliens, which is completely not true. But you bring up a very good point. And this is one of the things I had this conversation with these members of Congress about in the last few months, is that any civilization that is thousands to hundreds of thousands of years more advanced than we are, if they were hostile, they would just shut this whole enterprise down it'd take a fraction of a second. So this is a proof that they're not hostile. They're also very patient, and they don't want to do something that plays into this false narrative of this illegal secret government group. Because let's say they were to do what you're saying, and they come in and they liberate assets or people, or they shut down our capabilities to target them. That would be portrayed as an alien invasion, which is exactly what they're trying to avoid. And that's exactly what everyone in the public has been, and also, I hate to say, some people in the government have been brainwashed about. Like when Mr. Grush started talking about this event where aliens were shooting up and killing these villagers in Brazil. Well, he didn't know that that was a CIA clandestine operation using our own man-made craft, and it was 100% being done by humans. So why wouldn't he know that? Because he's a young guy who wasn't read into that. He wasn't briefed into that part of it. He just heard the story. So this gets into this whole question of a little bit of knowledge on this is an extremely dangerous thing, but to unpack all of this is very complex, to go through all the evidence, the cases, the science, the top secret. I mean, look, most people can't get their minds around the 70 or so top secret whistleblowers we have up on our YouTube channel, never mind the other 700. But so it's a very heavy lift, right? But it needs to happen. And at least the process has begun. But the ETs are way too smart. With my meager IQ, if I have figured out what the consequences would be of them doing what you just suggested and just coming in and taking their assets back or landing or exposing themselves massively to the whole planet, they know, like I do, that would be immediately spun by the spinmeisters and the liars as some kind of attack and alien invasion. And I think they're just way too evolved socially and spiritually and intellectually to fall into that trap. Because if I figure this out, I'm sure they have. But I think the other part of it is that I think this is a very good question that comes up a lot. Why don't they go ahead and do it and just fix this mess? I go, well, everybody heard of Afghanistan, 20-some years in Afghanistan. So we go in there. I know a lot of special forces and Green Beret people who are over there. And we go in there. We think we're going to impose Jeffersonian democracy on a country run by warlords, right? Opium trading warlords. And 20-some years later, we didn't make any more progress than we had before we went in. We left in a debacle a year ago. And now it's back to warlords. So you cannot externally impose evolution. It has to be organic. So I think the ETs are wise enough to see this and know that humans have to evolve socially, economically, politically, spiritually, whatever, by learning. Now, it doesn't mean they just sit back and let us do everything. And one of my concerns is, and this is something not being talked about enough, is that if you have technologies that are being reverse engineered and studied for 75, 80 years, right, since the 40s, and you reach a certain point where your human technologies get close to what the ETs have, and we become a threat to them, out of self-defense, they may have to intervene. And that is a worst case scenario. And I flat out have said that to members of Congress. We are running out of time to do this little do-si-do dance of kindergarten level of studying this issue. And they would not do it out of hostility, but they would do it out of self-defense. But most people don't know this. If I know of 122 cases where we've knocked their spacecraft down, we also have weapon systems on satellites out there in space that have targeted these extraterrestrial assets and craft. At a certain point, if our technologies get good enough and they're scalar, which means they could go beyond the speed of light and go to another star system, not the craft, but the energy weapon, then we become a true threat to other worlds. So my view of it is that if people want to know what the problem is in this corner of the universe, go look in the goddamn mirror. I mean, it's what humans are doing. It's like the Michael Jackson song, Man in the Mirror. But it's like we need to look at that and say, what are we doing? But the problem is most of the American public, and I would say most of the Congress still, don't know that those activities, that we have the technologies to be that kind of threat out there, these covert human illegal projects. So letting a group like that wander around doing anything they want in defiance of the law and with no oversight by the people and no oversight from the Congress, the people's representatives, that is a true threat. So when people say, are the UAPs a threat? I go, not the ones from off planet, but the ones that are here that we're making, yes. That is the biggest threat to our national security, way bigger than China, Russia, or Iran, by an order of magnitudes.
How soon do you think that all this will be coming out? And do you think, at
Good
what
question.
point do you think we're going to get to a point where this will actually be public knowledge?
Well, I hope it would be resolved in the next 6 to 12 months. Now, a caveat. When I briefed the CIA director, and then Lawrence Rockefeller hosted the Clintons at the ranch out in the Tetons where I'd gone, I thought the Clinton administration would have resolved this problem in 94 or 95. So, this is an ultra marathon I've been running. So, and I've learned to be patient. But I think things now are moving quickly enough. The other thing that's moving very quickly is that there are military and law enforcement people who are quite fed up with this, illegal run operation that's treasonous. I mean, I'll just be flat out put it out there. They are committing treason against the United States. So, which can be, you can be executed for that, as you know, by federal law. So I think there are certain people who are not going to sit on their hands if the Congress just dithers for another 2, 3, 4 years. Because from a law enforcement point of view, we've been able to prove that these operations are already criminal enterprises. And by the way, anyone who's listening who is an attorney, we're starting our own legal fund to sue all these corporations for these technologies under the civilian RICO provision, racketeering, influence, corrupt organization. It's been used against the mafia. I always point out to people, this organization is the world's largest and deadliest mafia. So you can invoke that RICO Act that was passed in 1970 as a civilian organization, which is what we're about to do. And there's a U.S. attorney on our team, a federal prosecutor, that when we go to discovery and get evidence, we'll turn over to him. He can do a criminal prosecution at that point. So we're not going to sit on our hands. Now, we're encouraging Congress to move quickly. But in the meanwhile, I can tell you there are things afoot that are going to go more quickly. So what I'm trying to do is be sure, and this is why, listen, everyone sitting here listening should write to your member of Congress and your 2 senators, whatever state you're from, and encourage them to pass these laws protecting the witnesses and to hold open hearings. Because I don't think we need to continue this process like at this last small hearing with the 3 guys, where Grush said, I can't talk about that. I have to be in a SCIF, which is a secure compartmented information facility, top secret facility. No, because these projects should not be afforded any national security protection since they are being run illegally. I think we should take a much more aggressive stand towards fully open hearings on this, which we've been calling for 30 years. But I think your listeners have more power than they realize if they were to write their member of Congress, their representative in the House, and their 2 senators, because they need to hear from the people. They need to hear that the people care about this issue.
Now, you've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
I know you've heard a lot of stuff. You mentioned you have 8 terabytes.
Yeah, at least
of information. What do you think is like the most dangerous information that you've came across or that you know at this time?
The most dangerous is their capabilities to stage a alien invasion that would convince everyone that's false, and B, things that they can do geophysically. Now, what I mean by that is I have a knock, a non-official cover, a guy who's deep cover, currently in the system that described this illegal covert group were able to move an asteroid on a trajectory coming from the sun to skim over the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific to cause massive tidal waves and destruction deliberately. And an ET craft intercepted that and saved our bacon. Now, I also know that they have systems that they can put on fault lines off the coasts of various land masses like California and elsewhere, and they can trigger those, and those can cause massive earthquakes and tsunamis. When I tell you that this group are a bunch of sociopaths and psychopaths capable of this, people need to believe it, and not letting those guys get away with their agenda, because this is a 70-year long-term plan that they're coming to a head now, is a true threat to humans. So that those two areas are the most disturbing things I have discovered about this organization, what their plans are and what their capabilities are. And these aren't theoretical capabilities. These are actual ones. So to have an organization that's not being overseen by the people or by Congress or the White House that have those sort of technologies and that kind of malicious intent, we're talking an existential threat to humanity and to our country. And that's why, I left my medical career a few years ago to fix this, because once I learned what was really happening, I was ready to walk away from, whatever it is, 400,000 or 500,000, 600,000 a year as a doctor to fix this problem. And I don't get paid, by the way. Everything we do with this is pro bono, or we're sort of philanthropic group. We're supported by donations. And, these films, by the way, you know how we did it? We crowdfunded them. The biggest crowdfunded documentaries in history have all been the ones we've done on this. And you can see all of them, like all three of them now. The Lost Century.
How much have you crowdfunded?
Huh?
How much have you crowdfunded?
Well, this last one, I think we raised a little over $700,000 to do the Lost Century and get it out. But see, we don't have a marketing budget. So the only way we can actually get the word out is folks like you sending out to your fans, the base, and influencers. And I know that people like Chris Brown and Demi Lovato and Sully Arna of Godsmacked and others have helped, get the word out through their fan base. So a lot of it is having influencers help us get the word out. And I thank you for that.
Okay. So celebrities have actually reached out and wanted you and offered to help you.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah. And particularly the ones who are very interested in the whole extraterrestrial contact, the CE5 contact, that app, but also the ones who are very concerned about the environment. Like the guy who narrated the Lost Century that just came out is Fred Durst, and he's the Limp Bizkit, lead guy. And he narrated the film as a donation, and he was at the premiere at LA Live last month in July for the film. And he's just a wonderful guy, great guy. And so we have that kind of support, which is really important. It helps get the word out.
Aliens is kind of a polarizing idea.
Mm-hmm. I don't call them that. I call them extraterrestrials or EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities. When you say alien, most of the time people think you're talking about someone from Guatemala. It's a very confusing word for people. So we use I use the word ET. It's easier to say ET. Then you know what you're talking about.
ETs are a very polarizing topic. Some people really believe in them. Some people really don't.
Well,
how would you?
Wait. Do you believe in water, H2O? You don't have to believe in it if you've seen the evidence for it. So I think what we need to do is elevate the discussion where it's based on facts, evidence, all that, which we put together. It's all out there for people to see. Now, if people don't read it or look at it, it's not our fault. So I think that one of the problems with this whole thing is that it gets relegated to a matter of belief. You can believe in God, you can believe in Jesus, you can believe in the tooth fairy, But when it comes to something like this, it needs to be based on what are the facts, what are the evidence, what's the scientific proof. Here's a radar tape that we have of one of these. In other words, it needs to be based on facts, not belief.
Right. My question was going to be, how would you convince somebody that this is real and that this is a real problem?
Well, that's why we have these documentaries and the books and the information we put out. You have to put the information in front of people. I always tell people how many, we have like 3,500 pilots that have encountered these objects, many of them with radar tape, and we have it. Well, if no one looks at it, I can't convince you if you're not looking at the evidence, and don't read. Same thing with the whole question of these crash retrievals. And we have the people who've been there, who've testified, who handle the bodies. We have forensic artist renderings of what those look like. We have some photos of the ETs themselves. Those are in Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. So I always tell people, it's all there. We package this all together in a way that anyone who sincerely wants to know. But ultimately, it's like anything else. If it's not taught in the schools and doesn't appear on the nightly news, people have to assume it's not real. But it is real. And I think the only way people have to at some point take responsibility for educating themselves with materials that we've spent 30 years assembling and putting on a silver platter that's right there. So ultimately, that's what has to happen. It's all there. I mean, it'd be impossible for anyone to go through the book unacknowledged or the film or look at the documents and the testimony of these 70 top secret guys I have up on my YouTube channel. And they're up there, name, rank, serial number, everything, and not know that this is true. But people have to actually look at it, right? And so that's the problem. With social media, people look at a half a second or 2 or 3 second tweet or Instagram picture and it floats. And I know I'm a bit of a crudmudgeon about this, but at some point, if people want to know, they're going to actually have to spend a little bit of time studying something, like anything else. I mean, if you're a musician, you had to study how to play a guitar or piano or whatever, keyboard or sing. There's a discipline that needs to be, the responsibility of every citizen to become informed. But certainly the material and the evidence is out there for anyone who sincerely wants to know.
You mentioned having photos of aliens.
Mm-hmm.
How many different photos do you have, and how did you get these photos?
Well, there are a couple that I have from intelligence sources. One is a dissection of one from a very long time ago, apparently the 1920s. Some of the others are from our CE5 contact expeditions, where we've had contact and these beings have appeared right there near us. And when you see the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind movie, you're going to go, whoa. Those are not Photoshopped. They're actually right there, and they're obviously not human. So, we have that kind of content. Now, we also have forensic artist drawings based on the top secret testimony of dozens of people who've handled the craft and the bodies. So if you go into this 2-day event we did in June, right before the National Press Club event, you'll see several, I think about 5 or 6 hours of presentation of all of those, what the craft look like, what the bodies look like, very accurate. That we spent a lot of time and a lot of money to acquire that and to get them in accurate form for the public to see. So it's all there for folks who want to dig into it.
Now, you mentioned different species of ETs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do they have different vehicles? Like, because if they come from different worlds, they probably have developed their technology a little bit different.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. There's a whole range of them. And this is one of the interesting things that we also put in this PowerPoint slide that we presented at the DC disclosure conference that's there available for people to see, is that we actually show all the different kinds of craft that have been retrieved and studied. And they go from your classic saucer or disc to things that are completely rectangular, cubes, all kinds of different forms. So they're not all the stereotypical flying saucer at all. There are ones that are triangular, that are ET. There are a lot of the man-made ones, by the way, are those triangular craft. Raytheon and Northrop Grumman have triangular ones. Many of the ones, if you look at the testimony from our Marine who just came forward, Michael Herrera, he was on the Sean Ryan Navy SEAL show after I was last month. He was in Indonesia after the earthquake and tsunami there. And we have a beautiful forensic drawing of this 300-foot diameter. That's the circular size of a football field. Craft that was man-made, that was transporting illegal weapons and humans that had been captured in these cases, in these boxes. So that, and his name's Michael Herrera, and that's all in the archive for people to look at. And he was there with 5 other people in his Marine platoon, and they were threatened with being killed if they spoke of this. So he's an incredibly courageous young man. That happened in 2009 when I think he was about 19 years old. So he's in his 30s now, but very courageous. And we've had some other people since then come forward corroborating these kind of covert black operations using man-made UFOs in these sort of illegal projects. And so that craft, most people would look at that craft, if it was zipping around, would swear it was an alien craft or an ET craft. But it isn't. It was one of ours.
Before we get out of here, being that all this technology that we've, came across and learned about and duplicated, do you think any of it has helped with diseases, or do you see any of it helping with curing diseases in the future?
It definitely will in the future. I'm not convinced that it's actually been applied yet. I was in an underground lab some years ago and saw some amazing technology that these scientists wanted me to see because I'm a doctor. And I will tell you that when all of this is fully disclosed, we'll be able to cure a great many diseases and injuries, like severed spinal columns that can be regrown, things like that. So there are some pretty amazing. Now, the reason those aren't out is that the technology, the energy field and the physics of those are very related to the energy systems. So all of it's been kept in a lockbox, black box. And I think there's going to be a complete, huge revolution in human civilization that's very positive. And actually, one of the things I always point out to people, there's so many people who are very despondent about the state of society and the environment and gloom and doom. I go, yeah, we're kind of really screwed up right now. But if you look at what these technologies are and how they can help humanity and fix some of these huge problems, then you can be very hopeful, because there are people, good people, trying to bring this forward. And but we need support. We need funding support for our projects to research these energies. We want to start a high-tech energy lab bringing these technologies out. There are a lot of things that people can do, to help. And ultimately, I think it's more back to, while I'm gratified by some of the things happening in Congress, I think it really is we the people. Us ordinary people like myself who, by the way, I have no standing in the U.S. government. I have no clearances. I have no official position, nor do I want one. I would not accept one, frankly, because I want to be a free agent. But I think that's why people need to empower themselves with the knowledge and then, help us in this movement to bring all this out. It's a new world. Yeah, there's a great story. Colonel Corso, who wrote the book The Day After Roswell, in 1956, there was one of these disc-shaped craft that landed out in the White Sands missile range. And he went out there, roared out there. And the ETs, and we had been targeting these craft with these early electromagnetic weapons. And the ET was asking him to turn those off. And Colonel Corso, who was a brash young, Air Force colonel, goes, "What's in it for me?" And the ET says very directly, "A new world if you can take it." So I always tell people, that was 56. I was 1 year old. I was born 55. 68 years ago, 67 years ago, we could have had a totally different society and technology and abundance and no poverty and no pollution. So I always tell people, the ET said, a new world if you can take it. So in other words, we have to be willing to embrace it and make it happen, because they're not going to force it. So I think this gets into where people have to then become sort of activists and get involved.
Man. All right, man. It's
great.
Great information.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure.
It was a really dope interview.
Great. Where are you? Are you in LA?
I'm about an hour east of LA.
Okay, cool. Yep. I get out there a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you mentioned you were just out here for your movie.
Yeah, and I'm back. I have to go back out in September, so I'm out in LA a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it, brother. And I appreciate you, getting the word out to your people.
Yes, for sure, man. I appreciate you for taking the time, man.
You're welcome.
It was dope, man.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too. What's up? This is Cam Capone. We got more content like this coming soon, so hit that like button, subscribe, and stay locked in to Cam Capone News.